So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on the part of the world you are from. Welcome to day 4 of the Future Law Virtual Summit. And to this session, which is a very interesting session, a very uh, honoring session for me myself, in which we're going to be talking to Dr. Cavoukian on privacy by design. Dr. Kavukian is recognized as one of the leading privacy experts in the world and served for an unprecedented 3 terms as the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, Canada, where she created the framework Privacy by Design. And that framework has since gone on to be codified in numerous standards by the ISO and in law by, for example, in the GDPR, to standards that organizations now have to adhere to. Since then, Dr. Kavukian is now the Executive Director of the Global Privacy and Security by Design Center. She is also a fellow at the Ted Rogers Leadership Center at Ryerson University and a faculty fellow at the Center for Law, Science and Innovation at the Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law at Arizona State University. She's also published 2 books, one entitled The Privacy Payoff, How Successful Businesses Build Customer Trust, with Tyler Hamilton, and Who Knows, Safeguarding Your Privacy in a Network World with Don Tapscott. So it is indeed a great pleasure of mine. I've been following Dr. Kavukian's work for many years on privacy by design. So I'm really honored to have you here, Dr. Kavukian, to present for us. And let me start to share my screen.
Thank you so much, Rishi. Very much appreciated. And we'll start with my first slide, please. And I always like to start by saying, let us dispel the myths. In the next slide, you'll see that's where I always start. Let's dispel the myths. There's so many myths out there. The next slide, one of the most common myths, privacy is not about secrecy. It drives me crazy when people say, well, if you don't have anything to hide, what's the problem? The problem is that could have been the motto of the Stasi police in the Third Reich, because it's absurd. It means that you have nothing that belongs to you and everything belongs to the state in terms of information. No, nothing is worse than thinking that. In the next slide, you'll see privacy is all about control. In the next slide, it's about personal control on your part relating to the use and disclosure of your personal information. That's why user control is critical. Freedom of choice. You have to be the one to choose how you want your information used and to whom you wish to have it disclosed. The Germans have a wonderful term for this called informational self-determination. That is the individual who must determine the fate of his or her personal information. And the reason this is so important is because context is key. Only you know the context associated with your data, if it's sensitive or not. I always say, look, privacy is not a religion. You want to give away your information, be my guest, as long as you make the decision to do that. Only you are aware of the context associated with the data. In the next slide, I point to a larger freedom. Privacy forms the foundation of our freedom. It is a necessary condition for societal prosperity and well-being. It breeds innovation and creativity, all of which we need. It's the essence of freedom. The problem is in its absence, surveillance takes place, which is the antithesis of privacy. It's the opposite of privacy. It makes you go inward. It shrinks your cognitive bandwidth. Sorry, I use that language because I'm a psychologist. That's my background. But it makes you literally look over your shoulder, go inward, the exact opposite of crazy blue sky thinking, which breeds innovation and creativity. In the next slide, I talk about privacy by design, which I created a long time ago. My first term as privacy commissioner, literally at my kitchen table over 3 nights. I came up with the essentials of privacy by design, which is all about being proactive. I wanted something to complement regulatory compliance, which is always after the fact. And here you'll see that privacy by design was unanimously passed as an international standard by the International Assembly of Privacy Commissioners and Data Protection Authorities. And this was just such a delight. because privacy commissioners tend to be brilliant lawyers. I call them lawyers, drilling down into Section 29, Sub 2, Part A. But what we realized is that you need to complement regulatory compliance like that, which is always after the fact, after the data breach. You need to complement it with something upfront, proactive, that is embedded into technology, baked into the code, embedded into business practices and policies right from the outset. And as I said, I was delighted this was unanimously passed, but surprised. And I spoke to a number of the commissioners afterwards to thank them. And that's where I understood why everyone voted in favor of this. In the next slide, you'll see what they said to me is, look, we're only getting the tip of the iceberg right now through regulatory compliance. Most breaches remain largely unchallenged, undetected, unregulated. And that's why it's no longer acceptable that we only rely on regulatory compliance after the data breach or privacy infraction has happened. What we need is to complement that with something proactive upfront. And that's why everyone approved of privacy by design as an international standard, that regulatory compliance alone was no longer sustainable as the sole means of ensuring the future of privacy. So we've had great luck with privacy by design. You'll see in the next slide, it's been translated into 40 languages. And when I was commissioner, not a week would go by when I wouldn't hear from some jurisdiction as to what they were doing in terms of privacy by design. So it was very, very heartening. Now, in the next slide, I want to point to the two essential features of privacy by design. I've talked about the first one. You have to be proactive. This is a model of prevention, much like a medical model of prevention, where you want to avoid the harms from arising. But the other equally important essential is banish zero-sum models. By zero-sum, I mean that you can only have a positive gain in one area, security, always to the detriment of the other area, privacy, so that the two total to a sum of zero. Well, it was never privacy that won over the other interests, and nor am I suggesting it should be, but I sure as heck wasn't going to have it lose out all the time to the other interests. Banish sum, zero sum is a basic either or win-lose model. And it is so destructive. When I was doing my PhD, my graduate work at U of T, University of Toronto, many years ago, I remember approaching Professor Anatole Rappaport many times. He was the father of game theory of zero sum, positive sum. And I used to say to him, Professor Rappaport, why do people embrace zero sum models? I'm the eternal optimist, and wouldn't you rather have multiple positive gains at the same time, win-win? And he said, of course, that's much better. But the reason people embrace zero sum is because it's the lazy man's way out. It's much easier just to do one positive gain instead of trying to do both. But the returns are much greater when you do positive sum, which means win-win, not win-lose or either or. And in the next slide, it's as simple and as difficult as getting rid of this zero-sum model. In the next slide, I talked to so many data scientists all around the world to say, can you do this positive sum model, multiple positive gains, win-win at the same time? And they said, of course we can. You know, they said, I remember talking to Bruce Schneier, a leading brilliant cryptographer, and he said, and this zero sum involves unnecessary trade-offs and false dichotomies. And it's as simple and as difficult as replacing the versus with and. It's not privacy versus security, privacy and security. You must have both. And that's what I've been trying to get across ever since I created Privacy by Design. In the next slide, I'll just walk you through very quickly. There's 7 foundational principles to privacy by design. I've gone through a number of them. You want to prevent the harms from arising by being proactive. Let me spend a minute on privacy as the default setting. This is critical. What it means is that you don't have to search, you as the customer or data subject, you don't have to search through all the legalese in the terms of service or the pages and pages in the privacy policy to find the opt-out box that says, do not use my information. for anything other than the primary purpose of the data collection, which is what I've consented to. I mean, we know nobody does that. Life is short. It takes far too long to do that, but it doesn't mean that privacy isn't of great concern to people. In the last 2 years, concern for privacy has been at an all-time high in all of the public opinion polls, Pew Research, et cetera, in the 90 percentile. 90% said they're very concerned about their privacy. 92% said they're very concerned about loss of control over their personal data. Privacy as the default setting reverses all of that. It says, look, you don't have to search for opt-out box to protect your privacy. No, 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 you don't have to do anything. We give it to you automatically. Privacy is the default setting. We are only permitted to use your personal information for the primary purpose of the data collection that you consented to. And if down the road, other uses arise, secondary uses that we'd like to use your information for, we have to come back to you and seek your positive consent on those additional uses. This is amazing. It basically says, you don't have to worry about privacy, we give it to you automatically. People love it, and this builds trusted business relationships like no other. And at a time where there's such a trust deficit, this works in your favor again and again. So make sure you embed privacy as the default setting. Embedded in design speaks for itself. If you bake it into the code, you don't have to remember it later on, it's always there. I've talked about full functionality, positive sum instead of zero sum. This is so important to make sure you have multiple positive gains, not one interest versus another. Let me talk about security for a moment. While the term privacy subsumes a much broader set of protections than security alone, in this day and age of daily hacks and attacks, if you don't have strong security from end to end with full lifecycle protection, you're not going to have any privacy. So make sure you have a solid foundation of security. Visibility and transparency is so important. It's essential that the individual has access to his or her personal information. It's their information. You may have custody and control over it, but it belongs to the data subject. So make sure they have access to their data. And if you start with respect for user privacy and keep it user-centric, all of this falls into place very easily. So that's the essentials of privacy by design. To me, it's like motherhood, but it may not be to others. Now, just in case you think that, well, you know, it's too hard, it'll never happen. Au contraire. A number of years ago, we did a compilation while I was privacy commissioner of 22 papers with all of the major tech companies. Think of any major tech company: Microsoft, Intel, HPE, Oracle, IBM, of course. I'm sure I'm leaving out a number of them on these subjects. And all of these, the companies, all of these, smart meters, near field communications, mobile communications, remote home healthcare, all of these, they did with privacy by design. So we can do this. Now, in our next slide, just in case you think it's still so hard, you'll see in the next slide, I got this for a wonderful letter from the Japanese Information Processing Development Center, JIPTEC. And they said, we've heard from Japan's private sector companies that we need to insist on the principle of positive sum, not zero sum, and become enlightened with privacy by design. I loved it because, you know, English isn't their first language, but if they can understand the benefits of positive sum versus zero sum, then surely the rest of us can figure this out. Now, you might say, okay, what's it going to cost me? In the next slide, of course, there is a cost associated with this, doing it proactively, but it is a tiny cost. It's a fraction of the cost you will incur when you have a data breach or privacy infraction, which I guarantee you will have if you don't do privacy by design. It's so hard to protect data after the fact. And these days, they're no longer lawsuits, they're class action lawsuits. It can cost you millions, but the damage to your brand, the damage to your reputation may be irreparable. The loss of consumer confidence and trust is very difficult to get back. So get smart, get proactive, and protect your data like no other. Now, in the next slide, I'm gonna go very quickly because I'm just speaking too much and I've only got 5 minutes left. You know that privacy by design was included in the new law in the European Union, the General Data Protection Regulation in 2018. And in the next slide, you'll see that the most exciting part of this was that privacy by design, data protection by design, and privacy as the default, which I told you is so important, this was included in the GDPR, which is absolutely huge. In the next slide, well, I would not go so far as to say this. Information Age, a number of years ago, said it's not too much of a stretch to say that if you implement privacy by design, you've mastered the GDPR. Believe me, there's much more to the GDPR than privacy by design. But I think what it's suggesting here is that if you go the extra mile and do privacy by design, you'll meet a lot of the other requirements of the GDPR. And in the next slide, you'll see that in Canada, our privacy commissioner a number of years ago said we should upgrade our private sector legislation and incorporate privacy by design. And in the next slide, our federal government looked like they were responding to this positively. They published a paper called Towards Privacy by Design. So we were all excited that they were actually going to do something and incorporate privacy by design. Have they done anything yet? No. This is the problem with governments. They are so dragging their heels. Anyway, we're optimistic. And we've now relaunched our privacy by design certification with KPMG. You see, when companies get certified for privacy by design, they gain a competitive advantage. They love it because they said it builds trust like no other. And that's what you want, trusted business relationships where you can preserve the loyalty and the business of your customers. And just for your information, I'm also teaching a course on privacy by design, an online course if you have any interest. And I've also just launched a new course as well, a Trust by Design course. So stay tuned. I thought I'd end on just talking about COVID for a moment. You'll see in the next slide, do not think that collecting extra personal information from individuals is a good idea if you don't protect their privacy. 300 experts from all around the world, epidemiologists from 26 countries, signed a joint letter warning that unless governments build contact tracing technology in a privacy protective manner, it will fail. Otherwise, such apps can be repurposed to enable unwarranted discrimination and surveillance. And it's vital that we do not create a tool that enables large-scale data collection on the population now or at a later time. And I can't emphasize this import enough. It's so important to protect people's privacy in this COVID-19 world. In the next slide, you'll see there was even another letter in the UK from 177 cybersecurity experts warning the British government that contact tracing apps could be used to surveil people even after the pandemic has ended. The one good thing that's come out of this, in the next slide, you'll see that Apple and Google partnered together, like possibly for the first time, to create an exposure notification app that public health authorities could build their app on top of. And it's amazing. It builds on Bluetooth beacons, which change every 15 minutes, so can't track you. It's utterly amazing. If you download this, and in Canada, it's called the COVID Alert app, which is totally privacy protected. It captures no personal information, no geolocation data. It's amazing. And this will alert you if you choose to download it. It will alert you if you've come within 2 meters or 6 feet of someone who is tested positive for COVID. And then you can decide to do whatever you want with it. You can go to your family doctor, you can go to a public health authority, be tested, you can do nothing. It is entirely up to you. So let's move forward, always in a privacy protective way. And privacy and security risks can best be managed through privacy by design. We can do this. If we focus on prevention, it's much easier to build in privacy and security. And it also reflects the most ethical treatment of personal data. So let's get rid of zero-sum thinking, either or, substitute privacy and security, privacy and data utility, always and, not versus. And let's get smart, leading with privacy by design. In the next slide, you'll just see that if I tweet every morning the latest privacy stories of the day. If you have any interest in following me on Twitter, thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Kavukian, for a very insightful presentation on the whole idea of privacy by design. I know it's a lot more than you encapsulate in those things, but for me, I think I got hooked on privacy by design, I would say around 2010. At the time, I worked in government in my country. We were looking to finalize our Data Protection Act and implement a structure, a governance structure to be able to carry this. And in doing the research, I came across, at the time you were still Information Commissioner of Ontario. and the amount of work and research into this whole privacy by design, I think that zero sum got me hooked, and I think I've been hooked ever since. Um, it's interesting you made the fact of its benefit for business. And I think I read, I think Cisco would have produced a report either late last year or earlier this year, actually codifying it in terms of dollars and cents, because businesses are dollars and cents focused. And that way they said that for every $1 spent on privacy programs, you got at least $2.70 in return. So why would you say that, it's well, one I should ask, do you think businesses are still taking this seriously, or do you think the pandemic has heightened the concern of businesses to really take this whole idea of privacy and protecting your personal data seriously?
Well, and it's not just businesses. This is the problem. It's public health authorities and governments around the world are saying in response to the pandemic, oh, we have to collect more personal data. We have to, make sure people remain safe. And they think, well, if it's public safety versus privacy, then of course we have to choose public safety. And my messaging has been, you don't have to choose one versus the other. Of course, public health is very important. There's no question, but you can do public health and protect privacy, just the way the Apple Google app is amazing. It allows both to take place, but it seems to be such a foreign message that you need to repeat it again and again. It's businesses are just trying to be responsive to the government right now because the government's in control. They're shutting down businesses all over the place, as you know, in phase 2 of the pandemic. And it's very, very harmful to businesses. So the problem is they've got to figure out a way that they can convey to everyone. You can have privacy within this COVID world. It doesn't detract from public health. You can do both. We must do both. And that's what I'm hoping the messaging will get across. It's very slow because it's not obvious. And it's really, really important that we be able to get this understanding that you can do both and we must do both. It will be so harmful because you see the pandemic will end, there's no question. But what we don't want to end is privacy. And that's often what happens after a major crisis, emergency, back to 9/11 and then SARS. People always say, well, we need public safety, so forget about privacy. No, you don't forget about privacy. Privacy forms the foundation of our freedom. It's essential to us. You have to do both. And that's what we have to find ways to do both. And we can do that.
Right, but we're also now seeing where there's now been a rapid advancement in AI, machine learning, and use of automated systems to be able to make decisions. So you're now taking out the person from the decision making, which may have, the person may still have empathy or other feelings to be able to make decisions. And you're now totally automating the process, not only from the data that's collected, but also the metadata that comes behind it that you're now using that to draw inferences. How do we now balance, does privacy by design have an impact or play a role with regards to that? And how do we manage that?
Well, there's so much we have to do in terms of machine learning and AI, artificial intelligence. I always say you have to look under the hood. So I work with people in AI, and now a lot of the questions are, we need ethical approaches to AI and machine learning. It can't just be taking place without anyone knowing what's going on. So we have to interrogate all the programs. It can't just be, well, it's machine learning, it's AI, we just have to accept it. It's nonsense. We need algorithmic transparency, so we know what the heck the algorithms are doing in machine learning, etc. So we continually have to look under the hood, trust but verify, and explain to the tech people who are developing these programs using these machine learning that they have to be accountable for what they're creating. You can't just say, well, that's the way it is. No, I'll give you an example. The Supreme Court of Canada found in favor of this indigenous gentleman who was in prison. He was up for parole, and he applied for parole, and he was denied. And why was he denied? He was denied because They used AI, artificial intelligence, to determine his likelihood for recidivism. And they found that he would probably recidivate, likelihood was high. So they denied parole. Well, he had a very good lawyer. The lawyer actually looked into the AI algorithms, and they found that it was based on a population that didn't reflect his indigenous character. So they challenged it in the court, and they said, look, the AI is based on a subset of prisoners who don't reflect this individual who was indigenous, who was, I believe, a Métis character. And none of him is reflected in this AI. And so it doesn't apply to him. The Supreme Court of Canada found in his favor. And they said, that's right. This AI does not apply to him. It's simply non-existent. So that's what I want to say. You can challenge AI, you can challenge machine learning. We just have to think about it.
All right. Does anybody else have any questions or anything, comments you'd like to have for Dr. Kavukian at this time? I think you have about 5 or 6 minutes left. Regina, Egwin.
Yeah, I would like to ask a question or make a comment. I really was struck by that the idea that the zero-sum game is the lazy man's game. That is really fascinating, and the idea that um, of multiple positive gains being possible. Um, I think not only possible, but really imperative, even if they, take a little bit more working through. So thank you so much for that, Dr. Kavukian.
Thank you so much. And I just try to get the messaging out that you never give up. You never give up, no matter how small the odds may be, how surveillance is growing, and people say, oh, look, forget about privacy. We can't challenge this mounting world of surveillance. Yes, you can. You can always challenge it. And I want to make it clear that there's always new initiatives arising that give us greater privacy against all odds. Take a look at, there's something called Decentralized Identity Foundation, all about decentralizing identity so that individuals can be in control of their personal data and their identity. It's amazing, the Decentralized Identity Foundation. And huge companies like Microsoft and IBM and others are part of this to decentralize identity and give individuals greater control. So I just want to give you all hope. You don't give up on privacy. It's growing. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think I've been preaching that for the last at least 10 years here in my part of the world. And I think it's slowly starting to resonate. I think, yeah, to Alyssa's point, that single word, zero sum versus positive something, that revolutionized my mind, my thinking way back then.
Great.
I've been a humble disciple ever since.
Thank you very much.
So if we have any, I know we're probably out of time right now.
Yeah.
It's such a small snippet, but I would advise anyone to pick up a copy of Dr. Kavukian's book. You can do YouTube searches on her. I know she's done a lot of podcasts where she goes a lot more into depth and read up on this whole idea of privacy by design. I think more so in the world we live in now, it's become a lot more important and imperative to understand these things and for us to also speak out as individuals whose data is being used. So if we have no questions, going once, going twice, well, Dr. Kavukian, I thank you very, very much for agreeing to come on today.
My pleasure, Rishi.
For your insightful words and your positive words of you never give up. And I think that resonates true, that we never give up. I think that's part of this whole summit that we're having here, of negotiating the new normal and not giving up, but out of the box thinking ideas and stuff like that. So on behalf of everyone involved, I thank you very much for participating with us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Sure, thank you very much. All right, Alyssa, what do we have coming up next?
I will post if people want to have a look. I will put it in the chat, the session that is coming up. I think we have a session coming up in 15 minutes. Let me just pull that up so I can give you the direct link.
Yeah, I think it was a transition lounge or something.
Um, it's the collaborative journey coming up next. So
Right.
let me put in the chat the direct link so you can go there directly. Just click on the link and it will take you directly to stage one, where you will be part of the collaborative journey. And that is some of the collective sense making that kind of weaves the weave group is doing to connect people throughout the summit. So just click on the link. It will take you directly to stage one and the collective journey. You have a few minutes, so if people want to
Right.
stretch.
I think I am also on again this afternoon from 12:30 my
Busy
time,
guy, busy guy.
Tobago time, in which I'll be, yeah, my session is going to be on, because Dr. Kavukian talked about privacy by design. A lot of big businesses I deal with here, this is the law. How do I now operationalize this law into practice to get me to the stage of being able to have privacy by design or to be compliant? So I'm going to be going through my 10-step process for organizations to implement data protection processes, policy systems in place, and then to have a discussion with anyone on the whole idea of, is privacy dead or not? I
Wow.
personally don't believe it's dead. It's
Hmm.
like Dr. Kavukian said, it's always there for people to, you have something that you have to fight for. So if you're interested, you can check me out this evening at, I think it's 6:30 CET time, 5:30 BST time, and
Great.
12:30 Eastern Standard Time.
Listen, this CET.
Yes.
CT time. That's great. That's great. Thank you so much, Rishi. That was really well moderated. Thank you. Ria is here with us. So thanks everyone, and see you on at different events at the FLVS 2020. Um, yeah, thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Okay,
Bye.
bye bye.